They called her too big to ride the circuit, too big for a saddle, too big for the dignity of speed, and so no one but a black stallion with a devil's name knew what her hands could do until the hail came down like buckshot and a 7-year-old girl stood screaming inside a corral, with the county's worst horse rearing above her. That is where this story ends up. It begins somewhere quieter. 5 years before that storm, autumn had settled over Cutter's Ford the way it always did. Brown and slow, the cottonwoods along the creek shedding gold onto water gone thin with the season. The Fairweather spread sat at the far edge of the county, a scatter of fence line and thin cattle, and a house that had needed painting since before the mother went widow. Frost came early that year. It silvered the grass by the second week of October, and the woman who worked that land before dawn each day pulled her coat tighter and did not complain, because complaining was a currency she had never been able to afford. She was heavy-set, broad through the shoulders and hip, with hands cracked from rope and weather, and a face that men in town had learned to look past rather than at. She was not unaware of this. She simply did not have time for it. There was a mother whose knees had gone bad, a herd that thinned a little more each winter, and 40 acres of graze that had to be defended against neighbors who circled dwindling land the way buzzards circle a wound. What she had, instead of the things Cutter's Ford valued, was attention. She noticed which cow favored a hind leg 3 days before it went lame. She noticed the particular hush that fell over birds before a storm crossed the ridge. And in the second week of that October, riding the fence line at the far edge of her mother's land, she noticed the line shack, abandoned, roof half fallen, corral fence somehow still standing, and beyond its broken rail, a black shape pacing. She had heard of him. Everyone in the county had. A solid black stallion with one white sock, purchased at auction 2 summers back by a rancher who'd meant to break him for the circuit, and instead watched 3 hired men carried off with broken ribs and worse. The rancher had turned him loose on leased land and called it a loss. Called him the Widowmaker and let the name do the rest of the work. She sat her horse at the fence a long while, the cold working into her fingers, watching the stallion circle the far side of the corral, like something that had given up expecting kindness and had stopped, also expecting cruelty. He did not look wild to her. He looked like a thing that had been misunderstood by everyone who'd ever put a rope on him. She did not tell her mother what she was thinking. She barely let herself think it in full sentences. But she came back the next morning before first light, with a bucket of grain and no rope at all. The frost that first morning lay thick enough to crack under her boots, and her breath went up in a column that the wind tore sideways before it could rise past the fence post. She left the bucket outside the broken rail and did not climb in. She had learned that much from watching cattle spooked by dogs, from a lifetime of learning which animals wanted space before they wanted anything else. She set the grain down, backed off 10 paces, and sat on an overturned trough with her hands tucked into her coat, and she waited the way she had waited out storms, and waited out her father's dying, and waited, more than once, outside the fairground gate, while men half her worth in cents signed their names to the circuit roll. The stallion did not come for a long while. He watched her from the far rail, ears working, weight shifted onto his hindquarters like a man deciding whether a door was truly open or only appeared to be. When he finally moved toward the bucket, he did it sideways, head high, one eye always on her, and he ate with the wariness of something that expected the ground to give way. She said nothing. She had already decided, sitting there with the cold working up through the trough into her spine, that the first kindness she gave him would not be a word. Words could be broken as easily as promises. She would let Grain do the talking until Grain had earned enough trust to hand the conversation over to her voice. She came back the next morning, and the one after that, through November and into the flat gray stretch of December, when the ranch work thinned enough to let her slip away before her mother woke. She never told her mother where she went. She told herself it was because there was nothing yet to tell. No rope on him, no halter, nothing a person could call progress in the way Cutter County understood the word. But underneath that reasoning sat a truer one she did not examine too closely. If she said it aloud, someone would ask why a woman built like a smokehouse door thought she could gentle the horse 3 grown men had failed to break, and she did not yet have an answer that did not shame her to speak. By the second week, she was standing at the rail while he ate. By the fourth, she was inside the corral, arms loose at her sides, letting him circle her at whatever distance he chose. She measured her progress, not in inches gained, but in the set of his ears, the moment his tail stopped, clamped tight against his hindquarters. The first morning, he lifted his head from the grain to look at her, a beat longer than fear required. 8 years on, in a different season entirely, a girl not yet born that December would stand at a different rail and ask her, in the plain voice of someone who had never once doubted the answer, how long it took to make a wild thing believe you. "That depends on the thing," Odessa said, in the present, wiping her hands on a rag that had been white once. "Some take a season, some take longer than you've got." The girl, 19 now, though Odessa still sometimes saw the 7-year-old in the set of her jaw, leaned against the rail with the ease of someone who had grown up on this ground and never known it any other way. She had her father's shoulders and her mother's coloring, what little Odessa remembered of it from a woman 3 winters gone before the storm ever came. She was watching Ash graze at the far end of the corral, an old horse now, silver starting to salt his black coat, the white sock on his left hind leg gone a little dull with years. "You never told me how long it took you," the girl said. "You never asked." "I'm asking now." Odessa folded the rag and set it on the rail. Some answers cost nothing to give, and she had learned, over 8 years of teaching this particular girl, which ones those were. 5 winters, she said, before your father ever saw a thing. The girl absorbed that, the way she absorbed most hard facts, without flinching, filing it somewhere she'd take out later and turn over. Nobody knew. Nobody needed to. Back in that other season, the one that lived always just under the present like water under ice, Odessa had believed the same thing, with the flat certainty of a woman who had already decided what the world would say if it found her out. She had not been gentling a horse to prove anything. She told herself that in the mornings, walking the frost-hard ground to the line shack with her breath going white ahead of her, the cold finding every gap in her coat, she had been doing it because the animal deserved better than what 3 men's failures had made of him, and because there was a version of patience in her that no one in Cutter's Ford had ever thought to look for, tucked under the size of her, the way a good blade sits hidden in an ordinary sheath. She had not known yet that a marshal's daughter not yet born would one day lean on that same rail and ask her plain questions in a voice that expected honest answers. She had not known there would be an after. "He still doesn't like sudden hands," Odessa said now, nodding toward Ash. "Never did. You'll want to remember that today." "I remember it every day." "I know." Odessa allowed herself something close to a smile, brief as weather. "That's why we're doing this today, and not last spring, when you asked the first time." The girl looked at her sideways, some old argument still simmering behind her eyes, and did not press it. She had learned that too, in 4 years of lessons. When Odessa said not yet, she meant it exactly, and only until she didn't. Behind them, the gate to the corral stood open, waiting. The girl's hand went to the rail, not gripping yet, just resting there, the way a person rests a hand on a door they mean to open in their own time. She did not look at the horse. She looked at the woman beside her, as if searching for the thing that had let a stranger to that horse's temperament stand so still all these years, while it decided, again and again, not to hurt her. Somewhere far off a rooster called and was ignored. The girl at 19 and the girl at 7 were not, in that moment, entirely separate people. Odessa had come to see them that way over time, the same watchfulness, the same stubborn quiet, folded over 4 more years of height and 2 more years of grief, that had thinned but never left her. She could still see, if she let herself, the shape of a small body pressed into the corner of a fence line, while hail came down like thrown gravel, and a black horse turned circles around her, screaming. That had been 8 years, and 1 week ago, nearly to the day. The almanac in the kitchen still marked the 3rd week of April, with a small ink cross her mother had made, and never explained, though everyone in the house understood it. But before that April, there had been an October, 5 years earlier still, when nobody's daughter had leaned on any rail, and the only witness to what Odessa did before dawn was a horse too dangerous to have an audience. She had gone to the line shack the first time on a morning cold enough to crack the film of ice on the water trough, carrying nothing but a coil of rope she did not intend to use, and a fistful of oats she did intend to give away for nothing. The shack sat at the far edge of her mother's land, past the last fence post anyone bothered to mend, chosen because no one had reason to ride that far, except to check on cattle that also had no reason to be there in winter. She had told her mother she was seeing to the northern fence line. It was not entirely a lie. She had, eventually, seen to it. The horse had thrown himself against the far rail when she came into view, ears flat, the white sock on his hind leg flashing, like something struck loose from the dark of him. 3 men's blood had dried into that ground before hers ever touched it. She had known their names, their bruises, the particular shame each had carried back into town, and she had thought, watching him wear himself down against wood that would not give, that whatever had been done to make him this way had likely started long before any of those 3 men laid a rope on him. She had sat on the fence rail for 4 mornings before she set foot inside. On the 5th, she went in anyway. She did not carry a rope. She had thought about it the night before, lying awake with her hands laced over her stomach, and had decided that a rope was the first mistake every man before her had made, because a rope was a promise of force even before it tightened, and the horse had learned to read that promise from 30 feet away. So she went in with nothing but the burlap sack she used to carry grain to the winter calves, and inside it, a fistful of dried apple she had saved from the cellar, without telling her mother where it had gone. The cold that morning had a particular bite to it, the kind that came up through boot leather and settled in the arch of the foot, and her breath went out in front of her in a long white rope of its own, before it thinned and disappeared. She did not look at him straight on. She had read once, in a newspaper left behind by a drover passing through, that a wolf looks at what it means to kill, and she had decided a horse might know the same about people, so she kept her eyes low, on the trampled mud and the manure frozen into dark coins at her feet, and she let her shoulders round the way they did when she was tired, because tired was not a threat. He watched her from the far rail for a long while. She could hear him more than see him, the huff of his breath, the shift of weight from one foreleg to the other, the small grinding sound a horse makes with its teeth when it has not decided yet whether to run. She sat down, not near him, halfway across the corral, in the mud, in her good wool coat that her mother would have words about later, and she stayed there without moving until her legs went numb beneath her, and the sun climbed high enough to throw pale light across the frost on the fence rails. It took him the better part of an hour to come within 20 feet, longer still before his head dropped low enough that she could see the long white blaze running crooked down his nose, off-center, like something drawn by a hand that had been in a hurry. She did not reach for him. She set one piece of dried apple on the flat of her palm, and set her palm on the ground beside her, and she waited, and the cold worked its way into her hip bones, and still she waited, because she had already decided, sitting on that fence rail those 4 mornings, that whatever this cost her in time, she had more of than most people believed, a woman her size and her circumstance, had any right to spend. When he finally took the apple from her open hand, his lips were startlingly soft and startlingly careful, as though some part of him remembered, from some life before the ropes and the men and the blood in the dirt, how a mouth was meant to be gentle. She stayed there a long while after, not moving, letting him learn the shape of her stillness, the way he had learned the shape of her patience. When she finally rose, her knees cracked like dry branches, and her breath hung white in the air, and the stallion watched her go, with his ears turned forward, not back, which she had learned by then to read as something closer to trust than any man in Cutter's Ford had ever offered her outright. She did not tell her mother where the dried apples went. She did not tell her mother about the hour spent before chores, or the rope burns healing pink across her palms from the winter before, when he had not yet learned that a lead did not have to mean a fight. There were things a woman kept for herself in a life that took most things from her by right of custom, and this, she had decided, standing at the fence in the gray hour before dawn, with her breath fogging and her fingers numb, was going to be one of them. 8 years on, in a kitchen warmed by a stove that had replaced 3 others. She set a cup of coffee down in front of a girl who was no longer 7, who was 19 now, and long-limbed and quiet in a way her father had never quite managed to be. And she said nothing about the letter still folded on the table between them. The one from the county fairground office confirming her name on the training roster for the spring circuit. The one the girl had read twice already, with her jaw set in a way that reminded Odessa, sharply and without warning, of the Marshal standing outside the corral fence 8 years before, watching her walk toward a horse that had already put 3 men in a doctor's bed. The girl turned the cup slowly between her hands, not drinking it yet, and looked up. "You never told me how long it took him to trust you." Odessa wiped her hands on her apron, though they were already dry, because it gave her something to do with the memory rising in her chest. 4 mornings before he'd come near, she said. Longer before he'd take food from my hand. Longer still before I'd trust the trusting. She looked toward the window, toward the pasture beyond it where a black shape moved unhurried through the frost-silvered grass. An old stallion now, slower in the hindquarters, but still carrying himself like something that had once been called unbreakable. Your father used to say, "A thing takes as long as it takes, and any man who tells you otherwise is selling something." She picked up the leather bridle hanging on its peg by the door, turned it once in her hands, the stitching along its cheekpiece newer than the rest, made to match one she had cut, and sewn herself in a line shack a lifetime ago. "Drink your coffee," she said. "We start before the frost burns off." The girl drank the coffee down to its last bitter inch, and set the cup on the sill, and together, they went out into the cold that still had teeth in it, though the calendar called it spring. The frost lay heavy on the fence rails, furring the wood white, and their breath went up in twin plumes as they crossed the yard toward the corral, where the old stallion had already turned his head toward them, ears pricked, recognizing the rhythm of their footsteps before he could have seen their faces. 5 winters had taught her that much at least, that a horse listens with more than his eyes. She held the bridle out, not offering it yet, only letting him look at it, the leather dark with years of oil and handling, the new stitching bright as a scar not yet healed over. He blew once through his nose, a soft explosive sound, and the girl laughed low in her throat, a sound that reminded her, not for the first time, of a smaller laugh from years back, a girl of 7, with hail in her hair, standing very still, in a corral full of screaming animals. "He remembers you," the girl said. "He remembers the smell of oats in my coat pocket," Odessa said. "Don't go making him a philosopher." But she said it gently, the way she said most things now, the sharpness worn off her, the way a river wears the sharpness off a stone, not by violence, but by years of water going over it in the same direction, morning after morning, until the shape that's left is the shape that was always underneath. She showed the girl the way to hold the bit low, not forcing it, letting the horse come down to meet the metal, rather than have it pushed up into him, a lesson that had taken her 4 mornings to learn from a horse who trusted nothing and had every reason not to. The girl's hands were careful. They had always been careful, even at 7, even reaching through a fence rail toward a beast 3 men had failed to break, and 1 woman had spent 5 winters learning to listen to instead. "You're readier than I was," Odessa said, and meant it, though she did not say for what. The girl only nodded, cinching the girth with the same slow patience she had watched modeled for her since she was 15 years old, and her father had first walked her out to this same corral, and said, without much ceremony, that this was where she would learn something no schoolhouse could teach her. Above them, the frost was beginning to burn off the west pasture in thin ribbons of steam, and somewhere behind the house a rooster called the hour, and Odessa stood with one hand on the top rail and did not yet let go of the bridle strap, watching the girl swing up, watching the old stallion accept the weight of her, the way he had once, a lifetime ago, refused to accept anyone's weight at all. She did not let go until the girl had settled into the saddle, until the old stallion's ears had flicked back once, twice, and found nothing in the weight above him worth minding. Only then did Odessa release the strap and step back from the rail, the way she had learned to step back from every good thing in her life, slowly, watching to see if it would hold. It held. The girl walked him a slow circle at the corral's edge, and the marshal, who had come out onto the porch in his shirt sleeves with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, said nothing at all, which was, Odessa had come to understand over 8 years of knowing him, the truest form of praise the man possessed. The wind shifted. It carried the smell of the far pasture, wet earth and new grass, and beneath it, faint as a memory, the smell of wood smoke from a line shack that had not stood in 6 years, its boards long since scavenged for a better fence. She had not thought of that shack in some time, but the smell brought it back the way smells did, whole and sudden, no permission asked. It had started, if a thing so slow could be said to start anywhere, on a morning in October, 5 winters before the girl playing near a corral had ever been in danger, 5 winters before a marshal had ever looked at Odessa Fairweather and seen anything but a shape too large for the county's idea of a rider. The frost that morning had been thicker than this one, crusting the fence posts white, and her mother had still been strong enough then to do the milking herself, which was the only reason Odessa had the hour free to walk the 2 miles to the abandoned line shack with a coil of rope over her shoulder, and no plan at all beyond the plain. Stubborn fact that a horse 3 men had failed to break was going to be shot come spring if someone didn't find another use for him first. She remembered the cold most, the way it had gotten into the seams of her coat and stayed there, the way her breath had hung in front of her face, while she stood at the broken corral rail and looked at the horse the whole county called the Widowmaker, and the horse had looked back at her, with an eye rolled white at the edges, and neither of them had moved for the better part of an hour. She had told no one where she went those mornings, not her mother, who assumed she was walking the fence line, not the men at the feed store, who would have laughed, or worse, would have told the committee, who did not need one more reason to say a woman her size had no business near anything half wild. She had gone back the next morning, and the one after that. 8 years later, the girl's hands remembered nothing of the cold, because she had never had to earn the horse's trust from nothing. She had been given it, piece by piece, the way a inheritance comes to someone who never saw the labor that built it. She stood now at the same rail, mended twice since, the wood gone silver with weather, and ran her palm along Ash's neck without flinching, without the careful, testing patience Odessa had once needed, just to keep her fingers from being taken off at the wrist. "He's listening to you different today," Odessa said, not looking at the girl, but at the horse's ears, which had gone soft and forward. "Different how?" "Like he already knows what you're going to ask before you ask it." The girl didn't answer that. She had learned, in 4 years, when a silence was Odessa's way of letting a thing sit before it was handled. Back in that first winter, the silences had been Odessa's only company. She had not spoken a word to Ash for the first 3 weeks, beyond the low, flat hum she used to fill the space between them, a sound with no words in it because words seemed to spook him worse than movement did. She had stood at that rail in weather that cracked the skin on the backs of her hands, and she had waited. Waiting was not, she had come to understand, the same as doing nothing. It was the hardest labor she had ever done, harder than pitching hay in July, because it asked her to want something badly and show none of it. By the 4th week, he had let her stand at the rail without rolling his eye white. By the 6th, he had let her close the distance to an arm's length, and she had learned the exact texture of the air around him, how it thickened when she moved too fast, how it eased when she matched her breath to the slow drag of his own. She had gone home each of those mornings smelling of horse and cold iron, and had washed before her mother woke, and had said nothing, because there was nothing yet worth saying. A man twice broken by 3 cowboys before her was not a thing to speak of before it was finished, if it was ever going to be finished at all. Now the girl swung up bareback, easy as pulling on a coat, and Odessa watched the horse's spine settle under the new weight without a shiver of protest, and she thought, not for the first time, that the girl would never know what that stillness had cost, would never know the years it took to earn what she now sat on so plainly, so simply, as though it had always belonged to her. Which, Odessa supposed, watching the marshal come around the barn with his hat pushed back and his eyes on his daughter, it now did. The marshal stopped at the fence rail and did not speak at first. He had a way of watching that gave nothing away, the same way he had watched her 8 years before, The morning after the hail, when the whole town was still talking about what they had seen, and he had said only 3 words to her. "You'll ride Summer?" As if the matter had already been settled somewhere above the both of them, and he was simply the one delivering the news. "She's got your seat," he said now. "She's got her own seat," Odessa said. "I only showed her where to put it." He almost smiled. He did that more now than he had in the early years, though the smile never lasted long, worn down the way a stone is worn by water, patient and without malice. His hair had gone gray at the temples. His daughter had his jaw and his stillness and, Odessa thought, something of her own patience too, though where the girl had gotten that was a harder thing to trace. Perhaps from 4 winters of standing in a cold corral before dawn, waiting for a horse to decide she could be trusted. The horse, not the widowmaker anymore, hadn't been in 8 years, not since the papers were signed and the name had quietly gone the way old names go in a small county, spoken less and less, until one day nobody said it at all. Ash carried the girl now in a slow circle, ears swiveling back toward Odessa the way they always did, checking, the way he had checked every morning of those 5 secret winters, as though some part of him still expected the ground to give way. It never had. That was the thing Odessa had learned before she'd learned anything else about him, that the ground did not have to give way, that a thing could be steadied instead of broken, if someone was patient enough to do the steadying instead of the breaking. She had known that about herself before she had known it about him. 3 cowboys had tried to teach him fear. She had only tried to teach him that fear wasn't required. The Marshal set his forearms on the top rail beside her, an old habit by now, the 2 of them watching horses the way other people watched weather. "You ever think," he said, "that this is the only place in the county where nobody's arguing about who belongs where?" "I think about it every day I'm not here," Odessa said, and did not explain further, because there was no need to, because he had been there the day it mattered, had stood at the edge of that same corral 8 years back, with hail striking his shoulders, and his daughter's small shape pressed against a black horse's foreleg, and some things a man carried, without needing them spoken aloud ever again. The girl brought the horse around at a walk, grinning, sun catching the sweat at her collar, and called out something that neither of them quite caught over the wind. The wind carried her words off toward the fence line before either of them could gather them whole, and the Marshal laughed, a short, surprised sound, as if he had forgotten he still had one in him. She didn't ask him to repeat himself, only nodded, because the not catching of things had become its own kind of ritual between them, the way certain sentences were better left to the wind's keeping. The stallion tossed his head once, testing the rein, and the girl let him, her hands soft the way she'd been taught, thumbs loose on the leather rather than white-knuckled around it. It was a small thing. It was the whole of it. 5 winters before that storm, in a shack with a roof that leaked snowmelt through a gap no wider than a hand, she had learned the same lesson from the other direction. Not how to hold the rein soft, but how to be the thing a soft hand was offered to. The horse had come to her sideways at first, ears back, a full turn of the pen between them, and she had let the distance stay for 3 mornings before she tried closing it by even a stride. Her breath had fogged white in that cold, and her fingers had cracked at the knuckle from the frost, and she had told no one, not her mother, not the hired men who thought she'd gone soft in the head walking out before dawn with a coil of rope and a sack of oats she'd skimmed from the ranch stores. She had reasoned, in the silence of those mornings, that a secret carried alone was safer than one exposed to a town that would have laughed her out of the county before she'd finished a single sentence explaining it. The horse had struck the rail once that first winter, close enough that she felt the wind of it against her sleeve, and she had not stepped back. That, more than anything after, was the moment the whole 5 years had turned on. Not a triumph, nothing so clean as that, only the plain fact of not retreating when retreating would have cost her nothing anyone else would ever know about. Nobody had been there to see it. She had not done it to be seen. The present-day wind shifted, carrying dust up off the corral floor in a low gold curtain, and the Marshal turned his collar against it out of old habit, though the hail that mattered was 8 years gone and would not come again from a clear April sky like that. "She rides like you did," he said, "before you let anybody watch." "Odessa, no," She did not correct herself to a name even in her own thinking anymore. Some habits from those 5 winters had never fully left her. Only watched the horse and the girl complete their circuit, and did not answer right away, because the answer was standing in front of both of them, walking a slow, unbothered oval in the dust. The girl brought the horse to a stop near the rail, not because the horse needed stopping, but because she wanted to look back at the two of them standing there, the way she had always looked back as a child, to see if she was doing it right. Some things did not change with 19 years or 4 years of teaching. The woman lifted one hand from the fence rail, not a wave, just an acknowledgement, the kind she had learned long ago not to waste on words, when a gesture would do the same work cleaner. The Marshal did not press her for an answer. He had learned that too, over the years, the way a man learns to stop knocking on a door that will open when it opens, and not before. He watched his daughter instead, the line of her back straight in the saddle, the way it had not been straight the first winter of lessons, when she had gripped the pommel with both hands and looked at the ground more than the horse's ears. Back in that first winter, the girl 15, thin still, all elbows and nerve, the corral had been half the size it felt now, mud to the ankles most mornings, and Odessa had stood at the horse's head saying nothing useful, only, "Keep your hands soft, keep your hands soft," until the words lost meaning and became only sound, the sound a person makes when they are trying to give another person something that cannot be handed over directly, only worn into the body slow, the way leather takes an oil. The bridle from that winter had worn through at the cheek piece 2 years back, and Odessa had cut and stitched a new one at her kitchen table by lamplight. The same pattern, the same waxed thread doubled through the holes, because a thing that works does not need improving, only remaking when it wears. She had given it to the girl without ceremony, set it on the fence rail one morning the way she might set down a coffee cup, and the girl had understood without being told what it meant to receive it. The horse tossed his head now, impatient with standing, the old habit of him still restless under the calm, and the girl laughed, a short, surprised sound, and let him walk on another turn of the corral, her hands easy on the reins, the way hands are only easy when they have stopped being afraid of the thing they are holding. "She's ready," the Marshal said, and it was not a question this time. Odessa watched the dust rise soft around the horse's hooves, gold in the low sun, and thought of another dust, another year, when the same ground had been churned to mud under hail and screaming, and no one had known yet what she could do. She did not answer him yet. There was a way of letting a thought finish itself before it was spoken aloud, and she had learned that patience the same winter she had learned the horse, that some things could not be hurried without being ruined. The girl brought the stallion around the far turn, past the trough where the water still carried a skin of morning ice, though the sun was climbing, and the Marshal folded his arms on the top rail, the way he had folded them 8 years before, watching, though then his knuckles had been white, and now they were not. The hail had come without warning that spring, she remembered, a sound like gravel thrown against tin, and the horses in the town corral had gone to pieces all at once, a churn of hooves and steam, and the high thin scream a spooked animal makes that does not sound like anything else in the world. She had been walking the road past the Marshal's office with a sack of feed on her shoulder when she heard it, and had not thought, had simply set the sack down in the mud and gone toward the noise the way water goes downhill, without deciding to. The girl had been small then, small enough to disappear behind the barrel that stood by the gate, small enough that the men shouting orders from the boardwalk had not seen her go in, after a barn cat that had bolted under the rail. Odessa had seen her. That was the whole of it, really. She had seen the girl where no one else had thought to look. The same way she had seen, 5 winters running, what the horse was underneath the name the county had given him. She had gone in through the gate they were all afraid to touch, and the noise around her had gone very far away, the way it did in the line shack corral at dawn, when it was only her and the horse, and the particular silence a large animal makes when it decides, finally, to be still. Now the girl brought the stallion to a stop in front of them, cheeks flushed with cold and effort both, and slid down without being told, landing solid on her own 2 feet, the way a person lands who trusts the ground. "He remembers the storm," the girl said, patting the horse's neck. "Doesn't he? Somewhere in him." Everything remembers, Odessa said. Questions only what it decides to do with it. The marshal looked at her a moment longer than the sentence required, and she let him, because there was nothing in it she needed to hide anymore, and the dust went on rising gold and quiet around the three of them and the horse. The girl went to unbuckle the bridle, and Odessa let her, watching the small hands work the leather with the same patience she'd taught her 4 years ago, back when the girl's fingers had fumbled the strap, and the horse had stood for it anyway, already gentled past the point of testing anyone new. That patience hadn't come easy. Odessa remembered a spring afternoon, the girl 11, not yet allowed near the corral fence, watching through the rails with her chin on her folded arms, asking why the horse let Odessa do things it wouldn't let the ranch hands do. Odessa hadn't answered right away. She'd been mucking the far stall, and she'd thought about the 2 cowboys who still wouldn't come near the corral, and the third who'd left the county altogether, and she'd said only that the horse wasn't unwilling. It was particular. There was a difference, and most men never learned it because they never needed to. The marshal had heard that conversation too, though he hadn't said anything at the time. He rarely did. He was a man who collected what he heard and turned it over later, alone, the way he turned over a case file, looking for the scene where the truth sat. Now he crouched by the fence post and picked up a fallen bridle strap the girl had dropped, turning it once in his fingers before handing it back. His hand lingered near hers, not from anything but habit, the same steadying instinct he'd had 8 years ago, reaching for a hailstone-bruised shoulder that wasn't his to touch, stopped only by the sight of the horse gone still. "She rides well," he said, meaning the girl, though he was looking at Odessa when he said it. "She listens well," Odessa said. "Riding follows." He nodded slowly, the way he nodded at testimony he'd already decided to believe. Behind him, the sun had dropped low enough to catch the dust, kicked up by the horse's earlier circling, and the whole corral seemed lit from underneath, gold sifting through the rails, like something poured rather than blown. The girl came back to stand beside her father, the bridle looped over her shoulder, and for a moment none of them spoke. The horse dropped his head to drink from the trough, unhurried, water darkening his muzzle. Odessa watched the white sock on his left hind leg flick once against a fly, and thought, not for the first time, how strange it was that a leg marked pale like that had once made grown men afraid to come near him, as if a horse could be read like a warning sign nailed to a fence post. "Same time next week?" the girl asked, already knowing the answer, already halfway to unhitching the gate. "Same time," Odessa said, and reached for the bridle strap herself, feeling the leather soft now, where it had once been stiff, worn the way only years of careful hands could wear a thing. 8 years was a long time to hold a single afternoon in her chest, and yet the second winter of gentling ash returned to her now with the particular clarity of things the body remembers better than the mind. She had been 30 then, 3 winters into the secret work, and the cold that January had come down out of the mountains like something with teeth. The line shack had no stove worth the name, only a cracked hearth she fed with green wood that smoked more than it burned, and she recalled sitting with her hands wrapped around a tin cup of chicory coffee, watching her own breath go white in the lantern light before dawn. Ash had not trusted her yet, not truly. That winter he still wheeled to the far corner of the corral whenever she came through the gate, ears pinned, the muscle along his shoulder jumping like water about to boil. She had learned, by then, to let him. She would sit on an overturned bucket just inside the rails and do nothing at all, not approach, not speak, not even look at him directly, for the better part of an hour, some mornings, until the frost on her coat sleeves melted from her own warmth and her fingers went numb inside her gloves. Her mother never asked where she went before chores. Perhaps she guessed. Perhaps she simply trusted that whatever her daughter did with the hours before sunrise, she did for good reason, the same way she trusted her to mend fence line or nurse a sick calf through the night without needing to be told how. The memory came to her now with the trough water still darkening the stallion's muzzle in front of her, the girl's boots crunching away across the yard toward the gate, and Odessa found herself running her thumb along the bridle strap the way she once had along a rope that wasn't ready to be trusted yet either. Some things a body earned only by staying. She had believed that at 30, with her hands aching in the cold, and she believed it now, with her knuckles thickened from years of leather work, arthritis beginning to whisper in the joints when the weather turned. The Marshal cleared his throat beside her, not urgently, the way a man does when he has something to say, and no particular hurry to say it. "She rides steadier than most men twice her age," he said, watching his daughter swing up onto her own mare by the fence. "Steadier than I did, first time out." Odessa said nothing to that, only nodded, because she had learned long ago that praise handed sideways like that wanted no answer, only acknowledgement. The gold light kept sliding lower across the dust, and somewhere behind them, in the shadow of the barn, a rooster called out twice for no reason at all, the way roosters sometimes did when the day was already finished with its business. 5 winters back, before any of this, there had been a morning in late November when the frost lay so thick on the line shack roof that it looked salted, and she had stood at the corral rail with her breath fogging in front of her and thought, not for the first time, that the horse would kill her before the season was out. He had thrown his head that morning like he meant to break his own neck doing it, and she had not moved, had not raised a hand, had only lowered her voice the way she'd learned from watching her mother gentle a colicked mare, years before anyone thought to teach her such things on purpose. It was slow work. It was work that asked nothing of a person but patience, and the willingness to be still when every instinct screamed to step back. She had gone home those mornings with her hands raw from rope burn she told no one about, had eaten her breakfast cold because she was already late for the milking, had said nothing to her mother beyond the ordinary business of the day. The secret had a weight to it, but it was a weight she chose, and there was a difference, she had come to understand, between the weight the world put on a person and the weight a person picked up herself. That November, the horse had let her stand 10 minutes at the rail without bolting. By February, he had let her touch his flank. It was not trust yet, it was only the absence of refusal, and she had learned to take that as enough, because enough was what she had. Now the present light was doing what evening light did, thinning itself gold and then amber and then something closer to rust, and the girl on the mare, no longer a girl, not really, not with that set to her shoulders, circled the far end of the corral at an easy trot, loosening the animal before she'd try anything harder. Odessa watched the line of her back, the way she rode with her weight settled low the way she'd been taught, and felt something in her chest ease the way a rope eases when the strain finally goes out of it. The Marshal shifted his weight against the rail beside her, an old man's shifting now, though he wasn't old, only worn the particular way men got worn from decades of standing watch over other people's trouble. "She asked me last week," he said, when she might try him alone, the black. He didn't look at Odessa when he said it, kept his eyes on his daughter, but Odessa understood the question inside the words, understood it the way she'd learned to understand most things that mattered on this ranch, sideways, and slow, and without anyone needing to say it plain. "Soon," Odessa said, "when the ground's not so wet from last week's rain." He doesn't like sliding under himself, black or no black, and neither would you. The Marshal made a sound that might have been a laugh, low in his chest, and said nothing further, and Odessa let the quiet sit between them, the way she'd learned to let quiet sit years back, not as absence, but as its own kind of company. The mare finished her circuit, and the girl brought her down to a walk, patting the animal's neck with the flat of her palm, and beyond them, in the deeper shadow of the corral's north corner, the black stood with his ears turned toward the sound of his own name, though no one had spoken it aloud in years. He was old now, gray starting at his muzzle, but the line of him was still the line of something built for trouble, still the horse 3 men had bled over before Odessa had ever laid a rope near him. She remembered the first time she'd sat him alone, that 5th winter, the line shack corral half buried in snow, and her breath fogging white in the dark before dawn. No one to see her do it, no one to tell her she oughtn't. She had climbed the fence rail with her heart going like a drum against her ribs, had eased herself onto his back, the way she'd eased her hand onto his neck 100 mornings before that, slow, slower than seemed sane, and he had stood, just stood. The snow had come down soft around them both, and she had sat there a long while before she trusted herself to breathe normal again, and there had been no one to tell, and so she had told no one, had carried it in her like a coal banked under ash, warm and hidden and hers. She had not known then that a marshal's daughter would grow up wanting the same stillness from the same horse. She had not known much of anything then, only that the animal trusted her hands before the county trusted her judgment, and that this seemed, some cold mornings, the truer measure of the two. "She rides like you," the marshal said now, breaking the quiet without seeming to notice he'd broken it. "Not the sitting, the waiting. She waits on him, the way you used to wait." "Had a good teacher," Odessa said, and did not say who, and the marshal's mouth moved in something that wasn't quite a smile, but stood in the same place one would have. The girl swung down from the mare, boots meeting dirt, with a soft double thud, and looked toward the corral's far corner, where the black stood watching them all with the patient, assessing stillness of something old enough to have earned its opinions. She did not look toward Odessa for permission. She had stopped doing that 2 summers back. She only looked at the horse, and then, briefly, at the sky, gauging the light the way a rider gauges how much day is left to spend. Enough day left, the sky told her, if she did not waste it standing still, and so she did not. She crossed the corral with the unhurried economy Odessa had spent 4 years drilling into her, not slow for show, only slow enough that the horse could read her coming before her hand arrived. Ash's ears swung forward. He remembered that walk. He had learned, long before the girl was old enough to learn anything, that some steps meant work, and some meant only company, and this one, he seemed to decide, meant something closer to the second, though the halter in her hand said otherwise. Odessa watched the way she'd watched most mornings that first winter, back when the shack corral held nothing but a black shape in the mist, and her own 2 hands, and a fear she never spoke aloud to her mother. That fear had a particular taste, metallic, like a coin held too long under the tongue, and she remembered it now only because the girl's shoulders carried none of it, carried instead the loose, unbothered confidence of someone who had never once been told she was too much of anything to be trusted with an animal this size. "Don't rush the near side," Odessa said, not loud. I know you know." The marshal made a low sound that might have been amusement, might have been the particular pride a man carries when he has spent 19 years watching a thing he loves become steadier than he ever managed to be himself. He did not step closer to the fence. He had learned that too, somewhere in the 8 years since the hail and the broken tether and the girl small enough then to be carried, not taught, that his daughter's education in this corral belonged to hands other than his, and that the kindest thing a father could do with such knowledge was stay quiet on the rail and let it happen. The girl slid the halter over Ash's nose with the same unhurried patience Odessa had once practiced alone in the cold, breath fogging, certain no one would ever see it, and certain, some stubborn corner of her, that someone eventually would. Ash lowered his head into it the way old horses lower their heads into familiar things, not out of surrender, but out of a long accounting finally settled. "He's heavier in the mouth than he used to be," the girl said, testing the rein. "He's earned the right to be heavy," Odessa said, and meant more by it than the girl was yet old enough to hear, though she suspected, watching the set of that young jaw, it wouldn't be long before she was. The girl gathered the reins in her left hand the way she had been taught, not the way the circuit riders did it, showy and high, but low against the withers, close enough to feel the horse breathe before he moved. Ash shifted his weight, ears swiveling back to find her, then forward again toward the open gate. He had not been young in a long while. There was gray now along his muzzle, and the tendon in his left hind leg, the one with the white sock, sometimes stiffened in wet weather so that Odessa rubbed liniment into it on cold mornings, the way her mother had once rubbed liniment into her own knuckles. The marshal watched from the rail without moving closer, his hands folded over the top board, and Odessa remembered, briefly, the way a smell can drop a person backward through years without warning. The first time she had set weight into a stirrup on this same horse, in the collapsed light of the line shack corral, 5 winters gone, snow coming down sideways through a gap in the boards. She had not mounted him that day. She had only leaned her weight there, testing, her palm flat against his shoulder, telling herself in a voice she used for no one else that if he threw her there, would be no one to find her before dark, and deciding that was a fair enough trade for what she was trying to build. He had not thrown her. He had stood, trembling faintly through the barrel of his ribs, and let her weight settle, and something in her chest had cracked open, the way ice cracks on a stock tank in early thaw. Not broken, just finally moving. The girl swung up now, the way that girl 5 winters in the past never had the luxury of doing casually, without ceremony, the mounting no longer a wager against injury, but a small, unremarkable fact of a Tuesday afternoon. Ash took her weight without so much as a shiver. He had been ridden thousands of times since that winter. He had forgotten, or perhaps simply outgrown, whatever grievance the world had given him before Odessa found him. "Walk him first," Odessa said. "Let him tell you what kind of day it is, before you ask him for anything." The girl nodded, already listening more to the horse beneath her than to the woman beside the fence, which was exactly as it should be, exactly what 4 years of Tuesdays and Saturdays had been aiming toward, without either of them naming it directly. Ash walked. His gait was slower than it had been at 15, when Odessa had first put the girl on his back for a supervised turn at a walk, the Marshal watching then too, arms crossed, jaw tight with a fear he never spoke aloud. Slower, but sound, steady. The Marshal exhaled, a long breath that fogged faintly in the cool morning air, though it was not cold enough, not truly, for breath to show. It was only a fog of habit, that exhale, the shape memory makes when the body expects cold and finds none. 8 years wore down more than fear. It wore down the need to perform relief, until relief simply sat in the chest, quiet, unannounced. Odessa remembered another morning like it, 5 winters deep into a secret nobody in Cutter's Ford had guessed at, when she had stood at the edge of the line shack corral with a bridle she'd stitched from harness scraps too cracked for anything else, and Ash had let her lay it over his ears without bolting. She had not called that a victory either, not out loud. She had simply gone back to the house and put grain in the trough and let her mother think she was tired from mending fence. The habit of not naming things had started there, in the frost-white dawns before chores, and it had never quite left her, not even now, watching a girl she'd known since the girl was 7 years old, sit a horse that used to be called a widowmaker. "He favors his left a little in the cold," Odessa said, not turning from the rail. "Watch for it in October." "I will," the girl said, and there was no impatience in it. No, the way she might have answered at 15, still hungry to prove she'd already learned everything worth learning. 19 had softened that hunger into something more like attention. She let the horse walk a full circuit of the corral before she asked him to trot, exactly as she'd been taught, exactly as Odessa herself had learned by trial and cold hands, and a stallion who did not forgive impatience. The Marshal shifted his weight against the fence rail, the wood worn smooth there from years of men and women alike leaning on it to watch. He did not speak. He rarely did during these mornings, as though speech might tip some fragile balance he did not fully understand, but trusted anyway, the way he had trusted it 8 years ago, when he stood in a hailstorm and watched a woman the whole county had called too big to ride, walk unarmed, toward a horse that had already put 3 men in a doctor's care. Odessa did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the girl, on the horse, on the particular angle of morning light falling across the corral dust, thinking, as she often did now, that she had spent so many years being watched for her size that she had nearly missed the plainer truth of it, that nobody in that corral was watching her at all anymore. They were watching the horse. They were watching the girl. Her work had become invisible in the way good work always does, folded so deep into the ordinary that it no longer announced itself. The girl clicked her tongue. Ash moved into a trot, easy, unhurried, carrying 19 years of trust in every stride. 5 winters before, the light had fallen differently across a corral no one watched, a line shack corral with rotted rails and a gate that stuck, and she had learned patience there, in a way the county never saw. She remembered the 3rd winter most, when Ash had let her lay a hand flat against his shoulder for the length of a held breath before shying off into the far corner, and she had walked home in the dark with her fingers numb and her chest full of something she did not yet have a name for. She had told no one. She had eaten her mother's beans by lamplight and said nothing about the horse, because to speak it aloud would have made it a thing other people could take from her, and she had already had enough taken. The girl brought Ash around the near rail now, and the marshal shifted his weight against the fence, a small sound of boot leather that might have been the only sentence he intended to speak that morning. Odessa had learned to read him the way she had learned to read the horse, not through words, which he rationed like a man who had buried a wife and knew their true cost, but through the particular stillness of his shoulders, which told her he was pleased and afraid in equal measure, the way any parent is when a child does something dangerous and beautiful at the same time. She thought of the bridle then, the first one, stitched by lamplight from scraps of harness leather, too worn for anything else, each hole punched by an awl she'd sharpened herself because there had been no money for a new one. She had not known, stitching it, that it would outlast 3 governors of the county fairgrounds committee, that it would hang now in a glass case at the ranch house alongside its twin, the one she had made for the girl at 15, with steadier hands and better leather, but the same slow, careful knots. Some things did not change, no matter how much time moved through them. A knot pulled tight was a knot pulled tight, whether the hands doing it belonged to a woman nobody wanted at the circuit, or a girl who had grown up never once hearing the word too big applied to her own body. The horse slowed to a walk near the rail. The girl looked over, found Odessa's eyes, and something passed between them that neither needed to say aloud, the way the best instructions never do. 8 years folded back on themselves then, the way they had a habit of doing whenever she stood at this rail, and she was in the storm again without meaning to be, hail stinging her scalp, the crowd behind her gone silent as a held breath, a 7-year-old's face white against the black flank of a horse the whole county had already buried in their minds. She remembered the exact weight of the mud sucking at her boots, how it had tried to keep her from the gate as if the ground itself doubted she could do what she had come to do. She remembered that she had not prayed. There had been no time and no use in it. There was only the horse's eye rolling white at the edges, and a child's small hand fisted in black mane, and Odessa's own voice, low, the same 4 words she had used every dawn for 5 winters, in a shack nobody knew to look for, said now in front of the whole town, like a secret finally let out of its jar. The marshal had told her once, years after, that he had not moved because he could not trust his legs. She had believed him. She had seen enough men freeze in worse weather over smaller things. Now his shoulder was beside hers again, older, thicker through the middle, gray coming in at the temple the way it did on men who had spent a life outdoors and never fought it. He did not speak. He rarely did in moments that mattered. She had learned that about him slowly, the way she learned most things, through repetition rather than declaration. His silence was not withholding, it was a kind of trust, the sort that did not require filling. The girl brought the horse around the far turn, sitting the gait now instead of merely enduring it, and Odessa felt the old ache in her knees, from 4 years of mounting and dismounting, to correct a heel, a hand, a seat, gone loose in the hips. 4 years was not nothing. It was longer than the courtship most women in the county got before a wedding, longer than some marriages lasted out here, where winters took what they wanted. She had given those years without once being asked to, because the asking had happened already, long before, in a corral in the rain, and some debts a person did not wait to be billed for. The stallion's white sock flashed once in the sun as he turned, bright against the black, and for a moment, it looked almost new, as if the years hadn't touched it at all. The girl brought him back toward the rail at a walk, cooling him the way she had been taught, reins loose, weight settled deep, and the marshal watched with the particular stillness of a man who had once stood at this same rail and understood almost nothing of what he was seeing. He understood more now. 8 years had taught him the shape of patience, had taught him to read a horse's ear and a rider's spine, the way he once read only weather and men's faces for trouble. He had learned it from her, in the unhurried way she taught everything, by standing near enough that a person absorbed the knowledge without noticing the moment it entered them. "She sits him better than I ever did," he said. It was not quite true, and they both knew it, but it was the kind of thing a father said watching his only child do something that frightened him a little. The fear folded so far down under the pride that it barely showed. "She sits him the way he needs sitting," Odessa said. Different animal than the one you remember. Different girl, too. She did not answer that. There was nothing in it that needed answering. Only the plain fact of years passing. The way a creek wore a channel deeper, without asking permission of the banks. The girl reached the gate and swung down without waiting for help. Boots finding the ground the way Odessa's had found it decades before, in a shack corral nobody knew existed, and looped the reins over the rail with the unconscious competence of someone who had done it 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 more. "Solo tomorrow then," the girl said, not quite a question, color high in her face from more than the ride. "If the ground's dry, it'll be dry." Odessa did not tell her that the ground being dry had never been the true condition. The true condition was something else, something that had nothing to do with weather, and everything to do with a rider deciding, alone, without a hand on the withers or a voice at the fence, that she trusted the animal enough to ask it for everything at once. That decision could not be taught. It could only be waited for, the way Odessa had waited 5 winters for a horse to decide the same thing about her. She looked at the white sock flashing dull now in the lowering light, at the Marshal's face turned toward his daughter with an expression he would have called nothing at all if pressed, and she thought, not unkindly, that some things a person only recognized once they were already long past waiting for them. The ground was dry. She noticed it the way she noticed most things now, without needing to say it aloud, the way a woman learns to carry knowledge quietly once she has spent enough years being right about horses and wrong about almost nothing else that mattered. Frost had lifted off the corral rails by 7. By 9, the dust had that particular pale, powdered look that meant no rain in 3 days, and none coming, and the girl arrived on foot from the Marshal's house, with her hair braided tight, and her face arranged into the kind of calm that only 19-year-olds and very young soldiers ever managed to fake convincingly. Odessa did not say good luck. She checked the girth twice, the same way she had checked it 4 years running, and then she stepped back from the horse's shoulder and did not step forward again. The girl swung up. The stallion, old now, gray coming in at his muzzle, the white sock on his hind leg less startling against a coat gone duller with age, shifted his weight and waited, the way he had learned to wait for a rider's decision instead of making his own. He was not the horse 3 cowboys had bled for. He had not been that horse in a long time, but something in the way he held still, ears turned back toward the girl and not toward Odessa, said he remembered exactly what kind of morning this was. The Marshal came to stand at the fence beside her, his hat pushed back, his hands folded over the top rail in the loose, unhurried way of a man who had stopped needing to prove he could still do a young man's work. Neither of them spoke while the girl walked the horse once around the perimeter, then twice, her seat easy, her hands soft on reins stitched from leather Odessa had cut, and oiled herself the winter before, matching a bridle she had made from scraps a lifetime ago in a line shack nobody used anymore. The papers granting the Fairweather herd its grazing rights had long since stopped being renewed each year and become simply a fact of the land, the way a fence line becomes a fact once enough seasons pass over it. Odessa had not thought of them in years. She thought of them now only because the girl put the horse into an easy lope past the far rail, alone, asking for it herself, and the animal gave it to her without a backward glance at the fence. The range had never asked her to be small. It had only ever asked her to be steady, morning after morning, long past the point when anyone was watching. She watched anyway. That was the whole of it.